Everybody, and welcome to our webinar, Recovering Food Waste Through Donation and Recycling, some ideas for the hospitality sector. So today's webinar is going to be talking about recovering food waste through recycling, composting, and donation, instead of the traditional disposal methods such as solid waste disposal. We have 3 panelists on today's webinar. Our first speaker is Gina Schwab from the U.S. EPA. She's leading the National Food Recovery Initiative, and she's also in charge of U.S. EPA's Greenscapes program for sustainable landscapes. She's worked in the resource conservation and recycling field for 21 years, and 18 of those years have been at EPA. Jean is the EPA lead and subject matter expert for organic materials management, and she serves on a number of national initiatives. She has a bachelor's degree in business and a master's degree in urban and environmental planning. Our second speaker is Jim Larson, and he's with the Food Donation Connection. And Jim directs the program development for Food Donation Connection. He's been with that organization since 1998, and he has worked with them to grow FDC's Harvest program, and that coordinates donations of perishable food to local nonprofit organizations. He's implemented this program at a number of facilities, including Darden Restaurants, the Cheesecake Factory, and Chipotle Mexican Grill. And he works with Feeding America and advocates in the U.S. Congress to help encourage the donation of surplus prepared food and explain the issues involved. And finally, our third speaker is Brad Tom, and he's from MGM Resorts International. So he's going to be presenting a case study about what this facility has done. He's the Director of Sustainability for MGM Resorts, Energy and Environmental Division. He's responsible for implementing the company's strategic environmental projects and initiatives in the areas of energy management, green building, sustainable supply chains, and outreach and education. He's a member of the U.S. Green Building Council, and he holds an MBA from Thunderbird Global Business School and a bachelor degree in economics and geology from Vanderbilt University. So I'd like to welcome our 3 speakers today. For the rest of you in the attendance, I want to welcome you to the webinar as well. I just want to go over a few ground rules. My name is Rachel Smith, and I work at NUMOA, which is the Northeast Waste Management Officials Association. And we're running this webinar under our pollution prevention grant funding. So we have about an hour and a half. We do have time for questions at the end of the session, but I would also encourage users to enter questions in the question box, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. It's in your GoToMeeting panel. So if you enter your question in that box, I will be able to facilitate some questions and answers after each of the presenters. So we'll be able to take 1 or 2 following each of the presentations, and then we have some extra time at the end for additional questions and discussion. And if you have a very complicated question or follow-up question that didn't really convey during the question box, I also have the opportunity to unmute you if you raise your hand. There's a raise your hand feature in the GoToMeeting panel. So at the very end, we can utilize that feature as well. But I just wanted to point you into those 2 directions for questions. Finally, following today's webinar, we will be posting PowerPoint presentations for all 3 presenters, and we will also be posting a recording of this webinar so that you can access it at another time. So you should receive an email tomorrow with a link to that webinar information where you can get the presentations, and I'll remind you at the end of today's session where you can get that information as well. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn the controls over to our first presenter. And our first presenter is Jean Schwab. So Jean, I'm going to go ahead and you can take it from here.
Okay, can everybody see this? Thanks everybody for joining us today. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your day for this topic, and we think it's pretty important, and we've got some great speakers here today. So I wanted to start off first by just giving you kind of the food waste 101 and some of the basics on why this is an interesting topic and a very important topic. If we go back to just what is the whole premise of this and what is waste, I mean, we can get beyond all the environmental issues here and really think of this as a business issue. It really is business 101. Waste is a sign of inefficiency. So if you're wasting product, you're throwing things away, that means you've spent your money for products and material that you're not using all of it and you're throwing it away, so you're also throwing away your money. So that's a very inefficient use of some very expensive resources. So here's what's going on in the U.S. these days. As of just our last study, it actually started back in 2009, that food now became the #1 material that is sent to landfills and incinerators for disposal. Now really think about that we throw away to landfills and incinerators more food than any of these other materials. So we put more food into the landfill than we do plastic or paper or wood or metal or even yard waste. So if you really think about when you're driving down the street, especially in the Northeast or other parts of the country where we've got lots of trees and leaves, and in the autumn you see bags of leaves, and in the spring and summer you see bags of grass, if you actually consider that we're putting out more food than even that yard waste, and by look at the chart there, almost more than twice as much. That's pretty staggering. So what happens? Now, Jonathan Bloom, a young researcher, took some U.S. Department of Agriculture data and calculated from farm to fork that you could fill up the Rose Bowl every single day with food waste. If we take what's just generated from businesses and households alone, just from the retail and consumer use, you probably fill up this Rose Bowl every 2 to 3 days. That's still amazingly staggering. And where does it all go? It goes into a landfill, and a landfill is nothing but a glorified hole in the ground. Really, that's all it is. It's not some magical mystery that things magically disappear. They're simply buried in a hole in the ground. So that would be like you having to take your food waste that you generate or any of your trash every day from your home and go out in your backyard and bury it. That's all that we're doing. Now, they're highly protected and designed, but it's still a big hole in the ground. So what happens? This is your trash going to the landfill, and every day throughout the day and in many areas of the country, day and night, these giant trucks like you see on the left back up and they just start dumping the trash in, and those are just bags of trash, plastic bags filled with predominantly food waste. And then on the right you'll see what looks like a bulldozer pushing all that waste around, and that is indeed bulldozing it, but it's also compacting it. That machine weighs tons, and the whole idea is to try to smash as much waste as possible into that hole in the ground so that you can get as much waste as possible into that hole in the ground. So here's a kind of pretty little side shot of what's happening. And every day this trash is dumped into the ground, and then at the end of the day it's covered over with some dirt to keep it from blowing away and try to reduce the seagulls and coyotes and rats and everything else that are attracted to all that food that you just put in the ground. And as it's packed down and covered over, it's kept pretty dry. The whole idea is to keep it dry. So if you're under the idea that you're going to send something to the landfill and you bought it because it's biodegradable, it's not going anywhere, people. It's literally going to be safe and dry in that hole in the ground, in that dry little cell, probably sitting in the plastic bag that you threw it out in the back. just nice and safe and fine forever. It's kind of like putting it in a Foot Locker in the attic or the basement. As long as it stays dry and doesn't get air and water, it's going to pretty much stick around forever. So keep that in mind with any of the biodegradable stuff. But this is all that's happening, and it's just buried in the ground, not going anywhere. And there is no way. This is it. This is a side cut of a picture of a landfill in areas where, let's say on the East Coast or along the shorelines where the water tables are high, they obviously can't dig very far down into the ground. So what they start doing is just piling up the trash and then covering it over every day with dirt and grass. So basically we have giant burial grounds here. And again, this isn't going away. This is going to be here for centuries. They're just nice burial mounds, sort of time capsules of our garbage. Now, as this stuff is packed away in there, the moisture that is contained in some of that material will start to anaerobically sort of ferment and kick off methane. So methane is the second largest source of human-induced methane in the U.S. The landfills are. So, and methane is 21 times more potent than carbon dioxide, so it's a hugely impactful greenhouse gas. And food waste and those materials in there are the main culprit for creating the methane, which is one of the major reasons we're interested in this. But along with it being a huge amount of waste, it's also a huge wasted resource, in that even a small percentage of that food, which not all of it is waste, but it's actually wholesome food that could go to feed your customers or those in need. So that's why we really want to focus on feeding people first and not landfills. And then taking the material, this food scraps and the resources, and running them through a process and getting them back into the soil so that we feed the soil, grow new crops, and completely close the cycle. So food waste and organic waste is one of the only things, one of the very few things that could be considered a model of sustainability, and we could actually get to zero waste with food waste and the organic waste because we could completely close the cycle. And what's great is that food really is the model of sustainability when we think about people, planet, and profits, that three-legged stool. We're helping people, you're improving your business efficiency, and we're helping the environment. And I always consider food waste is very difficult to manage, as a lot of you already know. If it were easy, people would be doing it already. It's heavy, it's wet, it's putrescent, and so there's always the problem of dealing with it and how do you manage it. And I kind of think this is analogous to, why do we keep cleaning up after this puppy? Wouldn't it just be better to housebreak it in the first place? And so how are we going to do that? We're going to look at the food recovery hierarchy. And this is the food recovery hierarchy. With most important on the top and sort of least desired on the bottom. We go from source reduction to feeding hungry people to feeding animals, industrial uses, composting, and then the least desired option is landfill and incineration. So what are we talking about when we talk about source reduction? It literally means reducing waste at its source. So for those in the food service industry, that means looking at trying to reduce your overbuying and processing waste, or maybe reducing over-preparation and plate waste. If you've got a lot of food that's coming back on the plates as you're monitoring this, maybe the portion sizes are too much, or there's something that folks don't like. Are you really looking at how food is prepared, or are there other things that you can do with some of the excess? Or let's say rice was prepared and not all of it was used. Can it be fried rice? Can bread be made into croutons? Those type of things. If you're not creating the waste in the first place, that's ideal, and there you're getting the biggest bang for your buck. Then obviously when you're doing food service, there's going to be surplus food. You always have more than you need. You don't want your last customer to come in and have absolutely nothing available. That's when feeding people is the next option, and we really would love folks to consider this. This means sending that wholesome food and the supplies, prepared foods, to the food banks and rescues, pantries, and kitchens so that it can be used beneficially, food used as it's intended to use. And Jim is going to talk to you later about the Good Samaritan Act and the tax benefits of doing this. So besides just being a magnanimous and warm fuzzy thing to do, it's also very economically feasible for you to consider incorporating that into your program. So I'm going to give you a couple examples of the source reduction first that we were talking about. Back in 2010, Sodexo at 8 college campuses piloted an initiative where they started measuring what was going on in the back of the kitchen during the prep, and after simply monitoring and tracking the food waste and making some adjustments, they were able to cut the kitchen waste by 1/3. Now really think about that. That's a huge amount. That's a lot of food that would have ended up in the trash. That's a lot of food that was purchased, those food resources, that never made it out to get sold. So not only are you not getting revenue for that, you're also paying to throw it away. So that's a double whammy. On the front side of the house, you're hearing more and more, if you haven't already, about trayless dining. And that's a growing trend not just in colleges and universities, but also in a lot of restaurants where they have buffet lines, finding that if they just simply took the tray away, people were still allowed, students or your customers were allowed to go back as many times as they want. They just had to get up and grab a plate of it. So if they wanted another piece of chicken or they wanted another piece of pie, they just had to leave the table and go get it instead of piling it all onto the tray, not eating it, and then tossing it. So when these folks went to trayless dining, they were able to cut the food waste by over 30% again, almost 40%. Again, huge numbers. So 30% in the back, 30% in the front of the house. That again is money that was bought with these. The product was bought and not used, and instead you're paying to throw it away and haul it around. And then also the environmental impacts of all that food going to waste. When we're talking about the option 2, donations, Walmart back in 2010 started donating. Actually, a few years before that they started donating, but their 2010 numbers were 128,000 tons of food that normally would have ended up in the landfill, but that went on to feed hungry folks. They anticipate in 2013 that basically 550,000 tons, that's 1.1 billion pounds, that they will be able to donate. And that, again, is food that's going to feed people and not to the landfills. Another organization out there is called Rock and Wrap It Up, and they work with hotels, the entertainment business, coliseums, arenas, all of those folks. And they collect not only food waste, but also for hotels, they'll also take the toiletries, the soaps, and the shampoos, and those type of things and get them to those in need. But just their work alone and working with us and the NHL, they were able to do 160,000 meals, and so that's 105 tons of food waste that were kept out. And Forgotten Harvest is another example. They're the second largest food rescue group in the nation after New York City, and in 2010 they rescued almost 20 million pounds, and in 2011 25 million pounds. So that's tons and tons of food that, again, would have uselessly gone to the landfill, but instead are feeding people, and oh, by the way, they're getting some tax deductions for that. The third on the hierarchy is feeding animals. That happens less and less, but Brad is going to tell you some of the stuff he's doing. Rutgers University also does this, sends it off to a local hog farmer. There are options to do that, and again, this is food being used as food, so food going to animals will offset the production of the food that would be raised to feed them. So again, that's another beneficial use up on the hierarchy. Number 4 would be industrial uses, and that's things like taking your fats, oils, and greases and converting them to biodiesel. It also incorporates anaerobic digestion, which is sort of in a closed, encapsulated facility or a vessel generating the methane, getting the methane, and then the residual from that being beneficially used as a soil amendment or composted. So there you get two bangs for your buck. You get energy and compost and a zero waste. So that's up on the list. Third is just straight composting. If you send it off for composting, either you do it on site or you send it to an existing operation. It's a great thing. Again, zero waste. It goes back and feeds the soil. And the last option is landfill or incineration. And this includes sending it off to an anaerobic digester where it's getting made into methane, but then the residual, the digestate, the actual food material, is then just being landfilled. So it's not going to beneficial use. The actual material itself should be returned back to the soil as much as possible. So how are things shaping up these days? Back in October 2011, Connecticut passed a law that required companies to compost if they produce more than 104 tons a year of food waste and soiled unrecyclable paper. So those are things like the wrap paper, wax cardboard, pizza boxes, those type of things. This can be pretty significant for those folks out there. Now, there is some small print that goes along with it, but it's one of those things that started. Will other states follow? Don't know. It's hard to say. A lot of it might depend on available landfill space and those type of things, but here's who it's applicable to, and it's one of these things that you want to consider. Wouldn't it first be smarter if you just tried to reduce the generation of waste in the first place so that you didn't even have to worry about coming up to that magic number, such as in Connecticut, 104 tons? So we have some resources at EPA to try to help you tackle this piece. We have paper audit sheets. If you've never done a waste audit, that's one of the first things that you should do. You can't manage what you don't measure, so you really need to understand how much you're throwing away. We find that businesses are very good at tracking what they pay for and receive, and then also what their sales are, but not so good at necessarily tracking what's going out in the back door and the dumpster and how much of that waste is attributable to things like food or breaking it down. It's not a fixed cost, it's variable. You have a big impact, and if you're reducing that cost, it's automatically a plus on your bottom line there. We also have some calculators that you can throw in your data on what you're currently doing, and then some what-if scenarios, and that would map out, like the picture on the bottom left there shows. The red would be if you changed your practices, your cost over time. The blue would show how your costs go up over time if you stayed with standard business practices. So all those are on our Tools and Resources tab at epa.gov/food recovery. I encourage you to take a look and utilize those. Another option for you is we have our Food Recovery Challenge, where we're encouraging businesses and industry to join us to tackle food waste, and we have not just the tools that I showed in the front, but also through WasteWise, the Re-TRAC tool, which keeps track of everything you're doing, spits out annual corporate reports, climate reports, so that you can just take that and put it into your corporate report at the end, how many cars you've taken off the road, your greenhouse gases, your waste, and all of that. It shows you your climate profile, and we found that businesses and industries are really fond of the information that they're able to do and track on this. And you can break it down by individual units. You can do just one big annual report, however you want to do it, but it's there. It's free for you to use. So we're really encouraging folks to join us with the challenge there. To really recognize it's a huge problem, but it's also a huge opportunity that's going on. And if you want to find out more, epa.gov/food recovery challenge. It's very easy. Go down, conduct a baseline, see where you're at, commit to setting a goal of reducing your waste by 5%. Just do it and then track it and report, and we'll recognize you accordingly for all those folks that are doing outstanding ones. And Brad, that's going to be presenting at the end, is a perfect example of some of the great things that can be done and the benefits of that. In regard, what we do for you is we give you these free tools and resources and support hotline, awards, case studies, profiles. And what this does for you is reducing your costs, improving your community image, helping with the community, and oh, by the way, this is good for the environment. So in parting, one of the things I want you to think about doing, your little to-do list, is consider joining us. Go out and do a waste audit, whether you join us or not. You just don't know what you're throwing away until you do. Contact your local food banks and rescues to see about opportunities to work with them to donate your surplus wholesome food. If you're looking for composters, there's a webpage called findacomposter.com that can help you locate composters in your area. And then those of you that have service companies providing food service, consider modifying your service contracts to require and request that they incorporate these elements, this reduce, reuse, recycle type thing, the hierarchy, into their operations. And request that of them, require it, so that it just happens automatically. If you have any questions, here's my contact information, or for more information, either our web pages or at both Food Recovery or Food Recovery Challenge. So that's it.
Great. Thanks, Jean, for your presentation. I just want to remind everybody, if they have some questions, they can enter them into the question box on the GoToManel, which should be shown on the right side of your screen. And I do have one question that's come up in the panel for you, Jean. It says, sure. On the issue of methane, how does this compare to carbon dioxide if the methane is captured and burned as a natural gas?
It depends on the source. If the methane is completely captured, let's say in an anaerobic digester, that's great because it is getting utilized. If the methane is coming from a landfill, generally a lot of this food waste is generating that methane while it's in the truck, while it's first being landfilled. They technically at landfills have up to 2 years to close the cell and put a methane capture system in it. The highly putrescent waste, such as food waste and grass, biosolids, are kicking off that methane, and that's going up into the air before any kind of capture system is in place. So it's the landfills are a really inefficient way of getting the methane, but once the methane is captured and then used, it can be beneficial compared to some of the other options out there.
Okay, great. So I think that's all the questions we have at the moment. Just for everybody's information, I'm going to be switching around the presenters right now. So our second presenter will actually be Brad Tom from MGM Resorts, and then after Brad, we'll have Jim do his presentation. So Brad, hopefully you're ready. I'm going to send you the link to be a presenter right now.
Okay, let's see here. How does that look, Rachel?
It looks great. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks, everyone. And I'm really happy to talk to you today. I am Brad Tom. I'm the Director of Sustainable Operations for MGM Resorts International, and I'm going to walk you through my presentation here for about 20 minutes. And let's see how to advance a slide. Okay. I have two screens going on my computer and the other screen was active. Sorry about that. So I'm just going to give you a quick introduction of who we are and what we do, go over our recycling process, talk about some key statistics, awards and recognition that MGM Resorts International has received, and then hopefully there's time for questions. So who we are, if you're not familiar with the MGM Resorts International brand, we are the owners and operators of 16 resorts, casinos, and hotels worldwide, but you may be more familiar with some of our name brand hotels that we own, and maybe you've stayed with us in Las Vegas at the Bellagio MGM Grand, Mandalay Bay, City Center, and the Mirage. And we are quite a large company. We're publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange as MGM. We employ 61,000 employees. We have close to 50,000 hotel rooms around the world. And we've, over the last 5 years, taken a real strategic approach to greening our operations. We started in 2005 with the creation of the Corporate Sustainability Division, which I work for. There's a group of 7 of us greening the company in the areas of waste management, recycling, energy efficiency, water efficiency, supply chain, and green building. And if you still don't know what I'm talking about, here's Aria. This is a 4,000 room resort right on the Strip. We opened 2 years ago. It is a LEED Gold certified building. It holds 6 LEED Gold certifications for its convention center and several of the towers, and it recycled about 1,800 tons of food waste last year. So this is kind of what we're talking about, and I hope some of you have gotten a chance to stay with us throughout the years. So now I'm going to jump into the recycling process, and before I do, Jean gave a really good overview of kind of the hierarchy of what's best for food, and I'm going to be talking about food scraps today, and in hierarchy I think 3 or 4, sending it to farms and composting. But before I talk about that, I want you to let you know that with excess food from our restaurants, and conventions, we send them down to our employee dining rooms, and the employees get to eat them, and we kind of donate there, and then we do feed our 61,000 employees 1 meal a day, every day, 365 days a year, and all that food gets eaten. It's a lot of food, but all that food also generates a lot of scraps, like bones and watermelon rinds. So I'm going to talk about what we do with all that. So all 10 of our resorts in Las Vegas are recycling, and I'm just going to talk about Las Vegas today. And we do this on the back docks. It's behind the scenes, out of the guest view. We have little mini MRFs, material recovery facilities. We have contracted labor forces opening every bag of garbage that comes from the hotel, the casino, the restaurants, and they are taking out all the recyclables. And that happens 24 hours a day, all year round. Our waste never stops, and neither do we. We never close our doors. And it's pretty exciting to say that we employ 150 local Las Vegans, and we've created jobs for them as recycling technicians and support staff for our programs. So as you can imagine, this is an expense for us. We try very hard through innovative ways to break even on our recycling or be a little cash flow positive by selling some commodities, but in general, we break even. So we're doing this for a benefit for our community, company, and of course the planet. Oops. Got a little fast on the trigger there. So what we're pulling out at these back docks is almost everything, aluminum and plastics, cardboards, cooking oil, food scraps, wood. We even collect cork and send it back to Napa Valley, and that goes into Soleil's shoes, and they make flip-flops and sandals. We're very much a macro recycler. We're going after the big stuff. We don't have the time or resources to really break down like some manufactured items that are conglomerates. So we're going really fast, but I'm going to show you later in the presentation how that works out really well, and we collect so much stuff. But I know you're all here to hear about food recovery, so I'm going to talk about our food waste right now. And we're separating our food scraps upstream in the employee dining rooms, which we have 10 of them, in our buffets, which we have 10, high-volume restaurants. We have 165 restaurants here in Las Vegas, and then countless leased outlets. So we're really working hard to get every high-volume restaurant on board with sorting their scraps into 96-gallon totes in the back of the restaurant. And upstream sorting does 2 things. It gets employees involved and engaged that they're recycling, and we have signs up in the kitchen saying, like, thank you, you're helping us, this is the benefits, to empower them, engage them in our programs. but also it really reduces the contamination. And contaminants include plastic wraps and cardboard boxes, wax cardboard that get into the food scraps and then can sometimes ruin a whole batch of food because the pig farm will reject it, or composters don't want it, of course, in theirs. So it's been working really well, and you're going to see in the statistics that that's been increasing. Not all of our places, especially the least outlets, do this program, but we're working on that this year to get everybody involved. So we have really two main outlets for food scraps, and we're really lucky. We might be here in the desert, isolated from everybody else in the country, but for some reason we're so lucky to have two great partners, and that's a local pig farm, which is now in the middle of the city because the city's grown up around it, and a composter that's just on the outside of the city. And they're both capable of taking high volumes of food scraps daily. And that's really important to us because we have to keep moving this food immediately. We can't collect it. We can't compost on site. We have such a high volume, we've got to get it out. And it's really a clean, fast, and efficient way for us. But I understand in other parts of the country aren't as geographically blessed as we are to have these partners. But if you are and you can partner with these guys, it's a really good way to get it done. So I'm just going to show you a few pictures. We audit our vendors annually, and we go out and we love to do visits. So the pig farm I'm talking about is the RC Farms pig farm in North Las Vegas. And if you watch like Learning Channel or Discovery Channel, whatever Mike Rowe's Dirty Jobs show is on, you've probably seen this pig farm. And you might recognize this white truck. That's the famous truck that splashes all over the place. So we have these blue bins on our back docks. And the toters come from the kitchen. They get into the bins. And we fill several of these up at each property daily. About half of our properties use the pig farm and half use the composter. So we like that competition. It keeps them on their game. It keeps prices reasonable for us. But once these blue bins head out to the farm, they get cooked. All the food scraps get sorted one more time for silverware, plastic wrap, etc. And it goes into a giant cooker. And that cooking process is regulated by the Southern Nevada Health District. It has to go to a certain temperature. It's cooked very well for the pigs. And it becomes a giant stew. You might have seen that stew on the show, and that truck right there carries the stew around. And if you hit the brakes really hard, the stew will go all over you. So then it feeds about 2,000 to 3,000 happy little pigs that are being raised here in Las Vegas. And like Gene said, that's food avoidance that needs to be grown for the pigs. It comes right from our strip properties. They eat almost everything. It's amazing, and they're really happy pigs. He also creates really large bins. Our pigsties, I guess, it's not like where the sows can't even turn around. The sows can walk around. The little pigs can run around. It's quite a nice farm, and then those go off to market. So the next one is our composter, and we partner with A1 Organics. They're right here in Las Vegas. And this is a picture of our back dock here. You can see the compactor in the background. So the food's not going in the compactor. The food is going into a large bin right here, out of the 96-gallon tote into a bin that they come with a truck and they pick up. And they also collect all of our landscape waste for us. So out at their site, they are making windrows, which is the second middle picture. They're about 10 feet high, 100 yards long, and they're mixing the food scraps with the landscape waste, and they cultivate that there. And then the last picture is after about, I forget how many days, like I think 90 days, it's made into this really high quality compost and mulch. And it's almost too high quality to be sold in stores. It goes to nurseries, and then they dilute it and mix it with other stuff for your consumption. And we even get a little bit of that back for our properties, for our planning, so it's kind of a closed loop cycle. It's pretty neat. And that's it. So statistics. The first number I want to talk about is our overall recycling rate. So this is for 10 properties. This is an average recycling rate for property recycling. We created our first baseline ever in 2007, and we were kind of shocked to see that we were less than 10%. That means some hotels had a 0. They weren't recycling at all, and some were at 20. And so we create a comprehensive strategic approach to get all properties recycling, and then we've grown the program. Some properties were recycling for 10 years, but they just didn't have the oversight and the management that they really needed or the resources to do a good job. So I'm really happy to say in about 4 or 5 years, we've quadrupled our recycling rate to nearly 40% this year. And some of the standouts are City Center and Aria, Mandalay Bay, and Luxor and Excalibur. And to put this in perspective, if you're from the Northwest and you're used to seeing 60% recycling rates, 80% recycling rates, here in Nevada, our state recycling rate is 20%, and the recycling rate of Las Vegas is 16%. So we have a lot to do here in Las Vegas, but we think we're really leading the way, and we're getting this word out there, and we're showing everybody that, hey, look, the biggest employer and taxpayer in Nevada really cares about recycling. We're trying to get over 50 next year. That's our goal. You guys can do it too, and we need the residents' help. Okay, so some notable statistics from 2011. We composted and fed pigs 14,500 tons of food scraps from our 10 hotels. Did about 8,000 tons of cardboard. Glass is at 10 million pounds, and that's beer bottles, liquor bottles, wine bottles. If a bottle weighs a pound, it's 10 million bottles. Paper, 3,000 tons, and aluminum, 200 tons. And of course, we do many other commodities. I just wanted to show you the scale of that. So we, all in all, our 40% recycling rate translates to about 40,000 tons a year that we're keeping out of the Apex landfill. It's one of the largest landfills in the country. It can go on for 300 more years. It's a giant hole and valley in the desert, but we don't want to do that. We want to keep out 40,000 tons and repurpose them. So what does our waste recyclable stream look like? Kind of the same statistic we saw earlier, that food waste is a very heavy component and a big component of our waste. Our waste looks like a household, just a really, really big household. Food waste is about 36%, followed by cardboard, glass, all the way down to construction waste. We haven't really been building a lot in Las Vegas lately, so that's very low. We do measure everything in weight, tons, and so that's why these heavy components. It's also good to keep them out of the compactors. One thing we do is everything we recycle doesn't have to go to the landfill. That keeps our compactor pulls to the landfill down, so that's fewer trucks off the road, the big heavy trucks, and saves the highway and also fewer emissions. Okay, just food scraps in general, you can see how we've ramped up, and in 2011 we crossed the 14,000 ton mark. Now that doesn't mean we're more wasteful and we're using more food. We're pretty consistent over the years in how much food we use and how many scraps we have. What we're doing a better job is capturing it. So more restaurants are getting on board, more leased outlets, more banquets, room service. Everybody wants to be involved and to keep this food out of the landfill, and the numbers are really skyrocketing. I don't know where it'll stop. If you could say maybe 30,000 tons, if we're a 100,000 ton per year group and 30% of it is food waste, maybe we'll get to 30,000 tons someday. That might be our goal, so maybe we're halfway there. The last thing I want to touch on, and I just have a few more minutes, is some of the awards and recognition that MGM Resorts has received. And why I bring this up is we're really thankful and humbled that the EPA and Gene's group awarded us with last year's EPA WasteWise Gold Achievement Award for food scraps. And we just think that's awesome. We share that with our employees, and we did a lot of press releases on it because we want people to know that we're doing our part here in Las Vegas, and when you come to stay with us, you're going to have a greener stay than you would have 10 years ago. We also won Business Leadership Award from the American Forest and Paper Association for our cardboard and paper recycling, and in 2010, the Glass Packaging Institute awarded us with a Friend of Glass for glass. So a lot of people say that recycling in Las Vegas is the Strip's best kept secret, and I hear that all the time. And it might be true, but we're really not trying to keep it a secret, I promise you. We are featured in news stories, television shows, magazines, radio. We present at national conventions. We do webinars. We give tours. We want everyone to know that we do this for the community and for the planet. And hopefully someday people will stop saying that it's a secret. And I'll be really happy about that. So I'm going to wrap up now and turn it over to Jim. If you'd like to know more about our company and about our environmental responsibility program, please visit our website at mgmresorts.com/environment. We have our 2010 sustainability report. On that website is a PDF that you can see all of our initiatives, from lighting to supply chain and green building, and of course food waste, recycling, and much more. So it's been a pleasure to talk to you today, and I look forward to continuing the discussion. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Brad. So we have a minute for a couple questions here that I've got in the queue. The first, you did talk a little bit about how you make your guests and your employees aware of the environmental practices. This question is asking, how do your guests respond? Like, have you had any feedback?
Yeah, very positively. You know, our guests are kind of divided into two main groups, and that's the convention customers and then everybody else who's there for entertainment, gaming, dining. The convention customers are very, very serious about environmental responsibility, and they will only bring their conventions to us if we prove our programs out and we show the results. And then everyone else, we have a website, it's public information, we try to get that out there, and I've never had a negative comment. No one criticizes us and says, well, I can't believe it. Most people are very positive, like, I had no idea, that is so awesome. Our guests sometimes question, well, I can't participate, like I don't have a recycling bin in my room, or I don't see them on the casino floor. What's up with that? And the answer is that the majority of the guests still come and sometimes leave the rooms completely trashed. And when we've tried with pilot projects to put bins in the rooms and on the floor, and they just get filled with garbage. And then that recycling bin goes to our mini MRF on the back, and it gets picked through just like the garbage cans do. So why put out two bins when we really have kind of a commingled trash and recycle bin? What we do is we put a sign on those trash cans that say, we'll do the recycling for you. So then and we put that in the rooms too. So if you have a plastic bottle, put it in the garbage can, it's going to go down to our MRF, and there's a very high probability we're going to capture it.
Great. And that kind of gets to this other question I have, is I'm talking about details on how the food waste is collected. So you said you have one bin for collecting recycling and regular trash. Is that the same for food waste? Are they located only in the restaurant areas, or are they all,
yeah.
Where do you keep those?
So food waste is just back of the house. There's no food waste collection in the front of the house anywhere. And it's in the kitchens where we used to have one big trash can. We've replaced it with like 3 Slim Jims. So now there's a Slim Jim for garbage, a Slim Jim for mixed recyclables, and a Slim Jim for food waste. And there's proper training, posters, signage in the kitchens in English and Spanish about what goes in what. They talk about it in pre-shifts. And there was very little resistance at the beginning. Now it's been happening for a year or two. People know what to do, where it goes. And so it's human labor, scraping plates where they belong, and really doing the work for us, keeping the contamination out of the food scraps. It's all done in the back of the kitchens. And then the EVS group, or the group that picks up garbage, they will cart that to the dock. They'll cart all 3 out there. And then it's the contracted laborer's job on the back dock to then send the food scraps into the food bin back there, send the garbage into the compactor, and then the rest of the recyclables will just go over the sorting table. So it's pretty efficient, and it's actually pretty simple. Once you get your bins and your training and your posters, it works out really well.
And the food scraps, you just throw those in the bins loose, right? Are there plastic bags, or you kind of just...
No, it's just loose.
Organic.
Yeah, it's loose in plastic, Slim Jims. We try not to put them in a bag. That bag then may become a contaminant. So after we do wash those out very regularly. Smell is a issue, especially in the hot summers of Las Vegas. That food has to keep moving off that dock, and those bins have to be clean to prevent, flies and odor.
Okay. Okay, great. So that looks like what we have for now, and I'm going to thank you again, Brad, and turn over the controls to Jim. In just a moment here. So Jim, I'm going to be making you the presenter. And Jim, you have to, looks like you're still on mute, so you're going to have to enter 184 pound. Okay, well, I'm going to give Jim another minute to get unmuted here. Here we go. Great. How you doing?
Hi, this is Jim. Can you hear me?
We can. Thanks.
Sorry. It's been one technical difficulty after another. Thank you for bearing with me. Brad, particularly thank you for taking this. Brad, thanks for taking that second spot while we work through the technical issues. I'm off-site, out of my office, so I fortunately was able to accommodate someone else's desk here and had to jump drive with my presentation. So here we go. Can you see the screen?
Everything looks great. You can go ahead.
Okay, great. All righty, great. Well, thank you very much for your time today. Again, my name is Jim Larson. I'm with a group called Food Donation Connection, and we're an organization that coordinates the distribution of surplus food. It's primarily surplus prepared perishable food, and as you'll see, we'll talk a little bit about who is donating prepared food, what kind of steps they're taking, what some of their concerns and incentives are, and then we'll look at a tax savings example because that's what helps drive the program. And ultimately, we say it's a socially responsible and really a simple alternative to throwing away surplus food. FDC was founded back in 1992 by a former restaurant executive, and he had seen a lot of surplus over the years and knew there was a benefit for a lot of reasons to donate, for tax savings, for environment, for social reasons. It's great food, and why, with that kind of investment, throw it away. So some of the groups that are donating the food, there's a lot of leaders do it. The first program actually in 1992 was the Pizza Hut Harvest Program, and then later KFC came on board, the other Yum brand company. And then Darden restaurants, Olive Garden and Red Lobster and Capital Grill and others started donating their surplus food in about 2003. In fact, last week there was a segment on NBC with Brian Williams highlighting the Darden Harvest Program. And then more recently, we've added like Aramar, for instance, at college campuses, and HMS Host at airports. So they're donating a lot of surplus food. And as Gene showed earlier, the food waste recovery hierarchy, and that's really what we present at that top section where we want to reduce waste at the source. We work with a number of companies that use this as a tool to see what surplus they have, and then they're able to maybe make some changes to preparation or carryover standards or certain things and actually reduce waste at the source. But by definition, for a quality restaurant or airport or hospital or college campus, they're going to have surplus food. And where we fit in is to help that food get to people, to feed people. Some of the other things are good ideas, feeding animals and industrial uses and composting. But if it's a wholesome quality food, we recommend going to feed people. And so that's why we work with develop systems for those donors to create a model for that. Our scope, basically, to dimension this, is we work with about 15,000 food service organizations ranging from airports and college campuses, hospitals, and restaurants. And those are linked with nearly 8,000 nonprofit organizations all across the country. Those nonprofits are groups that are in your community already. It might be a Feeding America food bank, but it also might be a women's shelter down the road or a church or the Salvation Army. So there are groups already out there, and provided they're willing to go and pick up the surplus food, generally on a weekly basis, they get the food for free. So it works out really well from them. We're developing processes in the UK and Australia as well. And just to mention it, the numbers aren't as big as food bank numbers, but since 1992, we've helped coordinate the donation of 230 million pounds of food. And last year alone, we did right about 35 million pounds. So if you think that as 1 pound per meal, roughly, that's 35 million meals that didn't go to the landfill but helped people in need. And more recently, we've created a nonprofit that's designed specifically to help those agencies in terms of training for safe food transport and provide them materials and possibly insulated pouches and things to safely transport food. So when we look at the steps necessary for prepared food donation, these are the steps we walk through, and these are steps that any food service organization can take a look at. Now, food safety, obviously, is really the first thing. There are Good Samaritan laws out there to protect, except in cases of gross negligence and intentional misconduct, and that is a great thing to have. I consider SAM laws a welcomed guardrail. It's something that I'm glad's there, but I never want to encounter. So food safety is first, and we develop the processes and the critical control points to safely donate prepared perishable food. The second step is to review operations. We typically would walk through a food donor location or restaurant, maybe from the back of the house towards the front, and create a list of food categories. We might see something in dry storage or in the freezer or cooler, something that's been thawed out, maybe ready to cook, but maybe it went beyond the internal hold standard. In a lot of cases, that food is cooked off and donated. And so we create a list of categories. And for a Pizza Hut, it might be 3 categories, and KFC maybe 5. You get to a Darden restaurant, and generally it's about 20 categories of food. And then at the airports that HMS hosts is operating the food service for, we get up into the 200, 300 categories of food that are able to be donated. Next, you want to select a qualified agency. Typically, it's going to be a nonprofit, a 501c3, and a group that can handle food safely. That'll be something that's inspected by the health department or maybe by Donation Connection or Feeding America. And this is the type of program where you really need ongoing management and support, because we want to believe that everyone's going to do it right for the right reason at every outlet, but it really doesn't necessarily happen that way, so it needs ongoing support. And then it's really important to track the donations, because if it's not measured, it's really not happening. So for social responsibility or waste or even tax savings, it's a great idea to keep track of it, and there's many ways to do that. And then to calculate savings, there's a variety of things to consider. Certainly in some areas of the country, it might be landfill fees. Waste reduction is going to be obviously a good one. And then also tax savings is an area we'll touch in a few minutes. I'll walk through a few slides and get a visual image of what this looks like. At a restaurant, there's going to be various things, maybe cancellations or no-shows, or things that are miscooked, or possibly things go beyond the internal hold time. Generally, a restaurant has hold standards that are there to ensure quality to the customer. When it goes beyond that, maybe a 1 or 2 or 3 hour hold time, it doesn't mean the food is unsafe or unwholesome. It just may not be of the precise quality that they'll sell to the customer. So there's ways to set it aside and cool the food and then package it. There's an illustration there of soup going into a bag that's actually lining a 1/6 pan for support, and then that's twist tied off and it's cooled and frozen. It's important that the food is held hot before it's set aside for donation, and that it's cooled rapidly to the danger zone. What I mean by that is a food safety danger zone from 40 degrees up to 140 degrees Fahrenheit. And the food needs to not be held in the danger zone. It could be held hot and then rapidly cooled. And then there's an illustration in the center of weighing a bag of carrots. You want to document the items, the quantity that's being donated, and either it can be weight or counted items, so that's one way to track that. And then the food set aside in the freezer or cooler so that it's cooled. And that green pan is something that we provide to donors so that it is obvious it's set aside for donation, so that the store member understands that, as well as, in fact, the health departments have become familiar with that as well, so they understand that's food set aside for donation. And then that clipboard is an illustration just of keeping track of it. That's an example of a restaurant that had 20 items. The restaurant information is at the top. The items are listed there on the left, and then depending on the day of the week, the pounds donated. At the bottom, there's some Internal Revenue Service fine print, basically, that allows the company to take a tax deduction, and then the agency that received the food's information at the bottom, and then they need to sign off to confirm that they received it. Now, that's a good way to do it. And we also have something we call e-log. It's a web-based system where a restaurant can go up and specifically look at a site on our website for their location, their items, plug in what they've donated, print a form. In the process of printing the form, the donation data gets sent over to Food Donation Connection. And then that form's still available for the agency to sign, because the IRS, if they're taking a tax deduction, the IRS needs to ultimately see that signature if the food is donated. On this next slide, just where the food is going. So that top illustration is a handoff of a lot of food frozen from an Olive Garden, handed off to an agency in Orlando, Florida. And that's one example of how it could be handed off. And then below that is a Feeding America truck in Chattanooga, Tennessee, moving some food from a KFC. So it can be transported either by Feeding America in a refrigerated truck, or as simply as frozen food, maybe an insulated pouch or a banana box, carried down the street or just locally to the women's shelter down the road. So there's a variety of ways to transport that prepared food. Again, it's been frozen. And then there's a picture of a kids' cafe serving some food after school, so kids don't necessarily go home on an empty stomach. Sometimes that's the last meal they're going to have, this after-school meal provided at kids' cafes. One other type of food I want to mention is ready-to-eat food or grab-and-go food. This type of food is just common at universities. It's common at airports. You've all walked past a case of food that's loaded. In fact, nobody really wants the last of anything. So they keep the case very full. It's generally prepared on site. So that first top illustration is showing some sandwiches being built at a HMS host facility in Tampa, Florida. And then a showing of that generally the cases are kept full. But during the day, the team will go out and inspect the food, and depending on their process, they're generally going to only have it on the shelf maybe 24 hours. So there's still a lot of food left after 24 hours. It's not something they're going to sell, but they're going to go ahead and capture it, safely save it for donation. In this case, Host is putting it in those red tubs there, and they properly put it in a cooler and wait for a pickup each day of the week. When the food gets picked up, it's transported. Here's a pallet of those red tubs being loaded into a truck, in this case taken again to a kids' cafe. It was interesting when we were down there and took these pictures. They took sandwiches, and since this room necessarily couldn't eat a lot of food, they would take half a sandwich and half a fruit cup and create a meal there again so they could have something to eat before they went home. This was in a somewhat depressed part of town, and it was certainly a welcome meal for them. They also can be taken to other food distribution sites or homeless shelters as well. So that's the type of impact that prepared surplus food donations can have. Now this next, I'm going to talk through the donor concerns and incentives. Certainly, they're concerned about liability protection, and thankfully back in 1996, there was a Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Law was signed into law by President Bill Clinton, and we appreciate that. Again, Pizza Hut was actually donating prior to that because they knew it was the right thing to do. And it's a good thing to have. Again, it protects you except in cases of gross negligence or intentional misconduct. But we will develop, and food donation guidelines should be developed so that it's never really something you have to lean on. And then donation logistics, as far as who's going to pick up the food, and if they don't want to, who will be the next agency in line. And those are things to consider when working through a food donation program. That's something that FTC will take care of. And then safe food transport training, that's something that's real important. We know the restaurants have a great handle on handling food safely, and then the organizations that are serving people also do. We want to make sure the food being transported from point A to point B is also safe and transported safely. So we have training involved for those types that will move food that way. And this next slide is about donor incentives. There's a lot of reasons to donate, and Gene and Brad have covered a lot of those things. And one of the first ones, though, is employee morale. I've never been in a restaurant and met people who have a passion for eating food that love to then throw it away. When you consider the amount of energy and carbon that's been invested into the food, from planting and harvest and transport and preparation, and then to throw it away, it just seems to be a crime. So the employees realize that, and they ultimately realize they're making a difference in the community. It's not just about making a living. And certainly through waste reduction at the source and then less food being sent to the landfill, it's certainly a less environmental impact. Through this type of program, the food stays local because it's donated local, and it has that immediate impact on those in need in your community. And then there are tax laws that encourage donations of food. Congress has intentionally set this up to encourage people to take the extra steps and extra expense to go ahead and donate the surplus rather than just going to the bin or the dumpster so that food goes in the landfill. So I'm going to walk through a couple illustrations or examples about tax savings. The first one where I'm going to talk about is C corporations, which are defined by the IRS as large companies that and so back in 1976, they set up a law where donors could get a deduction that was considered the lesser of half of the food's gross margin if you were to sell it, or cost a second time. It gets kind of complicated, but in essence, they can take up to twice cost. Now it's set up, and you'll see on the slide here in a minute, that it's incented, or it's made to encourage donations, but not allow profit to be made on donated food. Now this next slide talks about non-C corporations. Non-C corps are those S corps, sole proprietors, partnerships, LLCs, the small flow-through businesses where the income and revenue from the company flows over to the owners or the shareholders 1040 form on their tax return. So Congress, for many years, didn't allow this deduction for non-C corps, but in 2005, when Hurricane Katrina went through the Gulf Coast, they said, hey, you know what, we need to make this available for all business entities so this type of program can be encouraged. Well, in their wisdom, they only did it for 4 months, and then it got on to, you may be familiar with the tax extender, what I call roller coaster, because every couple of years they have to revisit it and decide whether to extend it. Historically, they've done that. Now they've waited a number of months into the year to extend it, so they make it retroactive, but it's frankly kind of hard for food service and donors to plan that way. So we really need to make this extended and really make it permanent. So there have been a couple of congressmen who have proposed a bill to make it permanent and improve it in a number of ways. So that might be something, if you're interested, look into that House Bill 3729. I'm going to walk through a tax savings example. We're going to look at the sales revenue, gross margin, taxes, and gross margin after tax, and look at the three things you can do with food you produce. The first column is selling product. That's certainly what you want to do. The second one is throwing it away and not donating it. And the third example, the third column, is what would happen if you donated surplus food. So I'll use some simple numbers of maybe a menu item that's $10. Roughly in the restaurant industry, you're going to have about 1/3 of that is your cost. So here I'm going to use an example of $3.25 of cost. So your gross margin is $6.75. When you apply a tax rate of about 37%, considering federal and state tax rates, you'll pay $2.50 to the government. So your after-tax margin is $4.25 based on that $10 item. That's great. That's what you want to do. We don't want you to do, create food for the sole purpose of donating. The second one is you're going to throw it away. So you get zero revenue, but you still have the cost. So you roll that cost into your tax return, and with that tax, you effectively get back $1.20. So you lose $2.05 from that $3.25 investment in the food that you threw away. Now the third example is when you donate surplus food. You still have no revenue, but you get the double deduction. You get that enhanced deduction of $3 1/4 and your original cost of $3 1/4. So your total deduction is $6.50. When you roll that into your tax return, apply that 37% tax rate, you're going to lose. You get $2.40, but you're going to lose. You lose a lot less. In this instance, its illustration shows that you lose 85 cents. So the takeaway from this is that when you donate, you're never going to make a profit, but you lose a lot less. So ultimately, when it's tax time and your company's writing a check to the government, you're writing a much smaller check, so it's money in your pocket, and that's where the tax incentive comes from for donating surplus food. As a summary, just want to walk through prepared food donations and realize that it's just a part of the solution for hunger. Certainly, there's a large quantities donated through Feeding America food banks. There's food stamps, SNAP funds, and government commodities and other things, and those are important and necessary. But prepared food donation programs are a part of the process and part of the solution. Again, it's a proven program. It ultimately is a variety of food and a consistent supply because restaurants have surplus, and there's obviously a number of different types of restaurants and they're local, and it ends up being consistent and readily accessible to people in need. And it has an immediate impact on their lives, and they really appreciate it. In fact, today I'm in Charlotte, and we visited an agency this morning receiving food from the Charlotte airport through the Feeding America Food Bank here in Charlotte, and they just had nothing but good to say about this type of program. And like we've talked about throughout this webinar, it's a positive impact on the environment, and it's free to the hunger relief organizations because of the tax savings that Congress has made available. Ultimately, you can do it. Food donors can go through the process of looking at their operations, develop food safe procedures, and identify agencies. It's those qualified groups that are nonprofits that are able to handle food safely, are inspected by the health department or Feeding America or Food Donation Connection, and then work through logistics of scheduling, and then obviously track the donations through either weighing it or counting it or coming up with a metric to keep track of it, then determine your savings, whether it's tax savings or a landfill reduced fees and things like that. And ultimately, once you've worked through this on a couple of locations, go ahead and expand it to other locations that you might be operating. With that is a wrap, and this slide now shows my contact information, the website for Food Donation Connection, and then the Harvest Support Network, which is, again, a nonprofit set up to help people that are moving surplus prepared food to help them with tools and resources. So with that, I'll give it back to Rachel and see if there are any questions.
Thanks, Jim. Just a reminder, people can ask questions through the question box feature on your GoToMeeting panel. I did have one come in, and Jim, I think you can answer this, and I don't know if Brad even wants to comment. It's talking about buffets. Can the food from an all-you-can-eat buffet, is that allowed to be donated, or because it's put out, is that considered?
That's a great question. It's a tricky one because it depends how it's held and what type of buffet. If it's been held hot and it's been handled by a food service employee and it's under their control, it may be, or in sometimes catering and other things, if the food has been held hot and maybe it's still in the hot storage and not presented. But it is a tricky one that needs to be looked at specifically. If it falls into the danger zone and it has direct contact by the customer, it's not as likely that you'd be able to donate it, but it's certainly something to be looked at.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so now I'm going to unmute the rest of the panelists, Jean and Brad, and open up the last 10 minutes for some additional questions for people. So, use the question box. If it's somewhat complicated and you don't want to write it down, you can use the raise your hand feature and I'll unmute you. And while people are writing their questions in here, I will go ahead and show you where to get all of the presentations. So this is NMOA's website for this webinar, and after today we'll be posting the PowerPoint presentations for each of the sessions here, so you'll have links to each of them. You can see the speaker bios, and we'll also be posting a recording of the session on this website as well. In addition, we do have the National Sustainable Lodging Network, and this website is sustainablelodging.org. And so if you are a member of this organization, which I think of this social network, it's like a Facebook-type social network, you can access copies of the presentations and the recordings by visiting the Sustainable Practices training materials. So you click there, and then go to webinars. This webinar will show up, and if you click on that link, you'll be able to access the presentation materials that way as well. Okay, and I do have a couple questions that have come in. I think this one's for Jean. Are there any grants or funds for businesses to implement a food waste reduction program? So I think that's with EPA's Food Recovery Challenge.
Sure. For those, it's probably best to check with each of our individual 10 EPA regions. They're listed on the Food Recovery webpage, each one of the contacts, the Food Recovery Challenge. And to check with the main contacts there, there are some, at times, some small grants that are available. This is probably not the best time for EPA funding-wise, so we're a little limited, but each one of the regions has the ability to decide which projects that they care to fund with the money that they've got. So probably the best thing is just to check with your regional contact. And if you can't find that, shoot me an email or Rachel one, and I'll get you that contact directly.
Okay, great. Thanks. And this question is one for Brad. Have you seen any problems or pitfalls regarding the recycling of food waste? This person's looking for some tips and things to avoid.
That's a good question. Problems or pitfalls? The only problem I can think of is kitchens being reluctant to start this because of space. If you've been in a kitchen, you know that every square inch is utilized, and most will say, well, we don't have room for a 96-gallon yard or gallon tote. So you got to work around that, and then by replacing their trash cans with smaller bins or separate bins, or even saying, well, look, do a food waste audit and say, well, most of the trash in there is food waste, so we're just going to replace your trash can with a food waste, and then give you a very small trash can to use. That's one of the challenges we've seen is people complain about space. Otherwise, it's just finding the right vendors. And keeping the cost in line. We're really lucky out here on a per ton basis. The cost to remove food through our 2 outlets is less than the cost to landfill. So if you haven't done that financial analysis or you haven't looked at that, definitely do and shop around for ways to save money on costs. But otherwise, no, our statistics show that we don't have a lot of problems. Things are really ramping up, and the more people that get involved and engaged, the better, and they seem to enjoy it.
Great. And I expect by training the employees on the benefits of this, it probably you know, helps a lot. They know what to do, and you don't have any contamination problems, things like that.
Well, contamination, that's probably the biggest challenge.
Yeah.
And that's probably the biggest problem. I should have thought of that. Contamination is always the biggest problem, keeping garbage out of our food waste, and that's proper training. You know, there's a lot of turnover in the kitchens, new employees coming in. Employees are busy, they don't care, they put the plastic wrap in the food waste, you know, it goes out. And then we do sometimes get hit with contamination fines, you know, from our vendors for a load that just has too much garbage in it. So we work with those properties or that outlet and say, what's going on here? You know, how can we help you? But yeah, keeping the food waste clean is very important. And some properties have mastered it perfectly. They just do it on their own. They know what they're doing, and others still struggle. So, good question.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So I guess I don't see any other questions coming up here. So I'm just pulling up the two web pages where you can access this information following the webinar. I'll probably have everything posted tomorrow or the next day. And I want to say a big thank you to our three speakers, Gene Schwab with EPA, Brad Tom with MGM Resorts, and Jim Larson with Food Donation Connection. You guys you know, did a great job. I think the presentations were really informative, and I hope that everybody listening learned something. So feel free to contact me or contact any of our presenters if you have any other questions or comments after today, and we'll get you the information you need. All right. So
thanks everyone.
Everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. Thanks, Gene. Thanks, Brad.
Yeah, we really enjoyed it today. Happy to be a part of it.
Thank you all.
Great. All right. Good afternoon. Good night, everybody.